Good morning, everyone. I'm actually quite excited to be here to tell you about Samsung Electronics, which is one of these things that seem to be invisible in plain sight, since it's a very, very large cap. But first, if I may just stop 1 second, because this is a tech company, and many times, we ourselves say that we don't do tech. But tech is a very wide, range. And you have, on the one side, people that do e-commerce. They consider it to be tech, cybersecurity or social networks. But then we also have at the other end of the spectrum, we have people that just make cables, so very basic stuff, or screens, or then other people just assemble components. So actually, they're not that different. Some companies aren't that different from even a car maker. They just put together components. So, Samsung Electronics, just quick summary for the company. It's a $260 billion company, huge, and invisible in plain sight. They are, the breakdown for the Ebit, you can see there, it's just 2/3 memory, and they have a big chunk in mobile, which is by a lot of people who know the company. And then they have displays, OLED display, and I'll tell you about that. And then actually they're number one or number two in everything they make. So the number one in memory, the number two in foundry, but to be honest, there's only two companies, so it's just two of them. The number three company almost gave up last year. The number one in display, in OLED display. And this is really important. You have to be number one because you have to have the size, and the size gives you your advantage and your strength, and we will talk about that. Also, one important thing to mention is they have a very complex ownership structure. And that's actually one of the issues that the company has, and that's actually one of our opportunities. Just bottom right there, we think there's a lot of potential in this company. Depends on how you cut it and slice it, and what multiples you want to give it. But we think there's a very good opportunity here. It's controlled by a family, but that's not a pretty picture. Just a quick Ebit breakdown. Snapshot to showcase where they make their money. And as you can see, 2/3 of the money they make in memory, as I said before. And then the blue, the heavier blue chunk used to be mobile, or is mobile, used to make a lot of profits when Android launched, and then it stabilized. And then we have, smaller slices at the bottom, where the company make money on and off, and, they basically move between businesses. So how did this idea originate? And I have to say, we followed the name for many years. So you sort of get to know the company and become familiar with it. And you realize there's a lot of cyclical entry points given to you by the market because of some of the businesses. Recently, not just on the back of the cyclical ups and downs, there were some delays on products that some clients were going to take. Another entry point given to us. It's quite interesting, though, that a lot of people cover the name, so 44 people following it. How can we have an edge? I mean, I don't think we do have an edge in terms of knowing the company better or being more experts, but I think we have an edge in our time frame for investment, and that's actually our key strength here. But it's quite interesting. It's invisible, like I said before. It's invisible in plain sight. It reminds me of this video, I don't know if you've watched it, of a bunch of guys playing basketball, and some guy dressed up in a gorilla suit walking through the screen and nobody seeing the guy. It's like we have inattentional blindness in a sense, right? And lastly, I just wanted to point out the contradiction between the rise of FANG, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, all market caps between or around 800 billion, and Google 500, Netflix to 160. And Samsung to 60, and I will show you they're not disconnected. So there's a massive discrepancy there. Just a quick snapshot as well. The red line is the market cap of the company. As you can see, it's actually done very well. From 2007, it's up 3 times. But that doesn't really mean that it's an expensive company. We have to see that in context with their EPS. The EPS is the dotted line at the top. And also, it's interesting, half of the market cap created, you could say it's actually coming from cash accumulated. So they've accumulated 90 trillion won, which is more or less $90 billion. And market cap has gone up by 190. So, the red line is actually just reflecting a lot of cash So the company is very, very cheap. 6.3 times PE, ex cash on that. And this is just, I would like to point out later, okay, EPS, ON shares. It has two types of shares. These are the common shares, the more expensive types of shares. The pref shares, the ones we invest in, are even cheaper. So something has to be wrong, I guess. And so these are the four main things that we believe the market doesn't like about the company. And also the four things I will go through to explain why we think this is what gives us an opportunity. So first is the ownership control, which is very complex. Then the cyclical nature of some of its businesses. Then the delay in some customer orders for OLED. And lastly, people don't like the smartphone business, which is a mature business. So going into the ownership control structure, if anyone can understand this slide, I would be very surprised. It's a complete mess. I had to circle in the middle Samsung Electronics so that people know where it is. As you can see, all the pink boxes are family. And then some of the blue boxes are family companies. And this is how they basically created this to control the company. So it's a 5% direct control by K.H. Lee, who's the son of the founder, one of the sons of the founder. And then they have family companies controlling another 15%, and then they have 7% treasury shares. That's how they control this. And the market doesn't like it one bit. However, good news, this is improving pretty fast. I guess the trigger was when in 2015, Elliott started a fight with the company after they merged two of the family companies to better control Samsung Electronics. They didn't like it. They said the merger was done at unfair ratios, which actually were market ratios, but they were very, very unfair in terms of the sum of the parts. So what happened there is the government, or the National Pension Fund, who owns about 10% of Samsung, had to vote. They could support Elliott and then go against the company, or they could support the company and the family, of course. And they supported the family, and Elliott lost. But rumor on the street is that they actually wanted something back. They wanted the company to improve the way they do things. They do corporate governance. And coincidentally, almost like next day, the company announced a policy of 50% return to shareholders, free cash flow return to shareholders. Could be a coincidence. Then the government changed. That was in 2015. Then the government changed in Korea, 2017. A new president came to the country and started appointing people to the Fair Trade Commission and several bodies to really, spearhead and protect and defend minority shareholders and the way things are run in Korea. 2018, the National Pension Fund adopted the Stewardship Code. That was last year. On the back of that, they actually ousted the CEO of Korea Air, and they've actually got a lot of companies to increase the payout. Meanwhile, so that was in the government, so there's a lot of support in the country for improving things. So these chaebol structures in Korea are being dismantled or simplified. But on the other hand, Samsung Electronics itself, as I said, increased their shareholder return policy 50%. They changed it to 50% pre-M&A. So it doesn't even, now you don't have to strip M&A expenditures. They also did a split, or the company 50-1. So they're actually trying to get people to invest in Samsung and to like Samsung. So what I say is, this was a problem. Everybody knows this is a problem, but this is improving big time. So the next issue, memory, cyclical business. So I just showed here the red on the left-hand side. The red line is Samsung Electronics share price. The blue is Hynix share price. That's another competitor. It's actually only 3 of them. And on the bottom, you can see what happens to DRAM prices over time. It goes up and down. Then the next generation replaces the obsolete generation. It also goes up and down. And that actually moves prices. On the right-hand side, you can see the blended DRAM memory price over time. That's the spiky line, and how that drags up and down the share price of Hynix and Micron, the third competitor. So this is a very cyclical business. There's no way around it. We have to just accept it. There's no good, it's not good, it's no bad, it's just what it is. It's cyclical. The consequence of this cyclicality is actually operating profits go up and down a lot. So on the left-hand side, you can see the industry, the total industry operating profits. Interestingly, though, Samsung Electronics tends to make 100% or even more than 100% of the industry operating profit. So they always make a profit, and the other guys sometimes make losses. On the right-hand side, you can see Micron and Hynix dipping below 0% operating profit, and how Samsung just dipped or touched it once in 2008 when the market was really, really bad. So, it's a cyclical business. It's difficult. Sometimes, well, it's very dangerous if you're not a leader, and this is what it is. The market doesn't like it. However, let me tell you, about a few things, a few good things here. First, let's go onto demand. So it's quite intriguing and interesting how people seem to, be generating and sending data everywhere and all the time. So we're sending millions of emails, WhatsApps, videos. We create a video, we send it to our friends send it back, and then I end up getting my own video back, many times. So it's quite ridiculous, but it is what it is. And on the right-hand side, that's the exabyte. That's the amount of data, and it's measured in exabytes, which is a ridiculous dimension. I'll just give you an example. 1 exabyte is basically 500 times all the academic research ever made in the US. And 5 exabytes is all the human speech ever made in history. And we're generating thousands of them, thousands of exabytes every year. Of course, lots of those exabytes are useless, unstructured data, but they're being generated. They have to be dealt with. So data is being created. I show here, actually, I think there's been a step change in the speed at what data has been generated and sent around. So at the bottom, first CAGR line, that's the old devices, before we had smartphones and before we had data centers. That was already growing pretty fast. On the left-hand side, there's DRAM. On the right-hand side, there's NAND flash. And then what happened is we were given better devices, more powerful. So now the creation of data is just accelerated exponentially. So we get to create and send and receive a lot more data. And this is structural. This is how people behave, right? So this is very good for demand. Just to elaborate on this, as we can see, there's better devices. For example, on the left-hand side, you can see the DRAM content of mobile and the NAND content of mobile phones. So DRAM, just memory, just stop here for a second. DRAM is what allows you to have all this many apps running at the same time, all this many windows open at the same time. And the bigger the screen, the better the resolution, the more DRAM we need. And the more cameras in a mobile, the more DRAM we need. And the more software to optimize picture taking, all this requires more and more DRAM. And there's actually an incredible war being waged by smartphone makers. Everybody's just cramming the mobiles with more DRAM because it's really difficult to differentiate. So you either add content. Actually, the Chinese are leading in this race. So it's actually a war. And the interesting thing is Samsung is selling the guns and the ammunition for this war. So they're actually doing it pretty well. On the right-hand side, we see what Micron think, the number 3 competitor, what they think DRAM content will be in the future, in the near future. When we have e-games and gaming going on in mobile, I'll tell you about better mobiles coming up next. But this is just accelerating and continuing. So this is another angle for demand, and this is actually coming from data centers and servers. And on the left-hand side, it's quite interesting. That's the amount of Capex done by the sellers of data center services. Of course, we have Amazon there. They're really, cleaning up. And then, of course, Microsoft saw that, and they want to participate. So they're actually ramping up their Capex to try and have data centers and sell the same service. So I'll just give you a quick data here, data point. Amazon in 2004 made 588 million net income. And then Amazon in 2015 made 596 million net income, pretty much the same amount of net income. Revenue was up 15 times. So they actually didn't manage to make a dime extra after almost 10 years and 15 times more revenue. But then in 2013, they actually started to talk about Amazon Web Services. And then By 2017, the whole company's operating profit was $3 billion. Amazon Web Services operating profit was $4 billion. So they're actually making all the money coming from Amazon Web Services. So Microsoft realized they want to participate. Facebook and all the Chinese just started. So this is going to continue. Also connected to this, all this artificial intelligence versus machine learning discussion. Another quick line here. Artificial intelligence today is not very intelligent. It's about massive data sets being compared and trying to find what the solution or the picture that is more similar to that. So if you think about a car being autonomous in the future, I don't know when, and that has to recognize something in the road, it has to store a huge data set so that they can compare quickly and see if that's a cat or that's a leaf, and they can just keep driving, right? It could be sitting in the car, or it has to be sitting in the data center. Anyway, it has to store a lot of data, and that has to be sent back and forth. So this is just going to continue. So those were things about supply and good things about supply, but this is also about supply, and this is not good. This is how much Capex this industry needs, and it's hugely intensive. You have to do a lot of Capex. And you can see on the left-hand side how Capex just comes and goes. I mean, it's really, really volatile, as the operating profit is volatile, of course. I think the interesting thing to highlight here is how the top guys, survive, of course. But for example, Samsung often does the same amount of Capex as number 2 and 3 combined. So of course, over time, if your engineers are as smart as the other guys' engineers, but you have twice as many engineers, you manage to open up a gap. And we can see that on the right-hand side. So as Samsung do the Capex and the R&D, they manage to get to the next generation of product a bit quicker. And that actually maintains over time and sometimes extends over time. So this is actually testament to a very good execution from Samsung over many, many years. This is also very relevant because the reason why people have to do this Capex and this R&D is because this is how the industry works. There's not been any wafer capacity, so this physical capacity of wafers, the silicon, added from about 2006-07 to today. It's flat. All this Capex is pretty much going into getting a better product. So a smaller product so that you can get more bits out of the same piece of silicon. That basically means that for the same expense, you can get more volume, or put differently, the cost per unit goes down. Right-hand side. Oops, sorry. That's the right-hand side. And you have to do that because the price per unit also goes down, left-hand side. So, we should be used in this industry to see price declines north of 50%, when the cycle turns against you. And that is actually explained, and partly explained by the cost going down at the same rate. So the trick here is to be the leader, to get there to the next generation before the other guys. If you do that, then you can sell your product at a 20% profit, for example, while the other guys are just covering costs or perhaps losing money. Samsung has done that many times over the cycle. So that is structural in the industry. This is how things work. Samsung executes, and that's actually what sets them apart. Still with Capex, I have to say over time, one thing that's been going on is Capex is getting a lot more expensive. So Capex intensity is going up. The blue and the green bars show how much it costs you to add 1% bits to supply. And it's actually multiplying. For example, DRAM costs about 2.5 times more than it cost in 2006-ish, and NAND flash costs like 4 times more. So it costs you a lot more, and it's a lot more difficult. The blue line and the green line are actually telling you how much you can add by migrating to the next generation. So when you move to from 20 nanometer to 16 nanometer, for example, you used to be able to add 20 to 30%. Now you can only add 10 to 15%. So it's getting a lot more difficult. Of course, what this means is over time, things get difficult, things get expensive. You never get there soon enough, you lose money. We've seen 27 names become 3 names. And it's not because anyone bought anyone, or a few names were bought, but the majority just died. So supply-wise, it's a difficult industry, but the structure of the industry has become a lot better. And it's consolidated. It's still cyclical, but we have 3 strong names on the left-hand side. We have 4 names for NAND flash. It's always been a bit more consolidated. This industry is not so bad, perhaps. This cyclicality basically acts as an entry barrier or perhaps as an exit chute. It's just sending people out of the industry and making it better. So if you live here and you make money, perhaps it's not such a bad thing. This is very interesting, and this is something quite recent, which the market has been talking about discipline in the industry because there's only 3 names since about 2011. And I was actually sort of waiting on that point because we needed to see the cycle turn against us and see how people behave. And we are seeing now a lot of Capex cuts, and still people are making a lot of money. So this is the first time we see people cutting Capex, still making money. Before they cut Capex because they just couldn't afford it. But now they cut it, and they can afford it, but this is rational behavior. So I really like this. I really like this industry now. I really like Samsung Electronics within it making a lot of money. So if we have an industry like this, and we have a lot of demand in the future, and that demand has to be satisfied, but then you have to do a lot of Capex. You need your return on your Capex. So if you're going to invest for the future, you will have to get your return back. You'll have 3 guys now behaving rationally. So I think this is a good industry. Cyclical, but good. So next point, which market was a bit, shaky about, was OLED. OLED stands for organic LED. And this is actually a new type of screen that, the Japanese gave up on, and the Koreans continued investigating and investing in. And actually, Samsung Electronics is the leader. And what this actually does is it gets your screen to behave on a dot-by-dot basis. Each dot is independent. Each dot is made up of a mixture of chemicals, which is a bit like a cooking recipe. It's not exact, so you can't have the Chinese copying this straight away and make it work. It has live decay. The color, doesn't work as good. So it's difficult to make. Also, it's very important. Each dot lights up or doesn't, which basically means you save a lot of power. So the reason why Samsung bet on this, and more than $40 billion Capex over the years, that's how much they've done, is it allows you to save a lot of power, so you can have a lot longer battery life. That's great for mobile devices. Also, it could potentially be very cheap to make. So on a traditional screen, you need a backlight unit to light up from behind. Here, you don't need that. In the traditional display, you needed a glass sold by Corning and Asahi glass. Here, you don't need that. You can have plastic. So it could potentially be a lot cheaper to make. So Samsung bets on this. This actually proved to be a very good bet. Again, good testament to management and foresight and stamina. And on the left-hand side, you can see Samsung Display pretty much control the market with more than 100%. On the right-hand side, you can see that they actually make a lot of money here. So it's a good business. The Chinese are trying to catch up. They're still behind for a number of years. I can again say that it's not easy to make. This is not exact science. This is more like a cooking recipe. LG Display, which is the second best display maker in the world, can't make this yet. So what happened is, they sold it to their own mobiles, and then Apple is buying it, and then the Chinese want to buy it. But, there's only Samsung Electronics selling it. So we are at the beginning of a very promising industry, and they're the sole supplier. Potentially, they will end up with, 1/3, 50% of market share, whatever. But it's a very promising industry and a good place to be. Lastly, if I can just quickly touch on the smartphone business, which people hate because it's a mature industry. Well, I don't really hate it, to be honest. It's a great cash cow to have. They generate $10 billion of operating profit every year, and it's quite stable. The largest Android manufacturer in the world, and probably the only one that makes money. It's actually probably the second company that makes money in the world after Apple. Nobody else makes money. But the genius thing about mobile is this is not just about profits here. They use this to stoke the fire of this competitive war going on in mobile. So they take their own mobile, they put a new, better screen on, OLED, and then Apple say, hey, I need to compete with this. So then Apple goes and put OLED screen in their own mobiles. Then the Chinese also copy it. Of course, they clean up on that. And they say, well, actually, I'm going to put more memory in my mobile, and the Chinese have to follow and put more memory on it. Just to give you an idea, Samsung sell about 20 to 30% of the bill of materials to Apple. So Apple really use Samsung for a lot of the components. So this is genius. They're just making money while making the other guys kill themselves. So it's pretty genius. Again, good management. So how much can this be worth? Well, last year was a very good year. They made a lot of money in memory. That's on the right-hand side. You can see all the main blocks there. Potentially that has to make a bit less money. But then that's going to be compensated by some of the other components making a bit more money. So perhaps we won't be too far off that. They have to do some Capex, etc. And whatever multiple you decide you want to apply to this, perhaps if you say 12 times, that gives you 115% upside. That's not bad. That's not bad for a company that sits at the beginning of the value chain, who doesn't really care who wins the competitive wars of data centers or mobiles, screens. That's not so bad. Actually, I also thought it would be interesting to compare it with Apple, because they're not so different in many respects. So they have a revenue which is not too far off, an EBITDA which is not too far off, and they have a bit lower operating profit. They have to do a bit more Capex. But then, for example, in terms of free cash, they're perhaps a bit less than half, but the market cap is less than a fourth. And actually, they also have a lot of net cash in the balance sheet. It's about 1/3 of the market cap. So does it really make sense that this trades, 1.8 times EV/EBITDA and Apple 9.6? Is it really 4 times worse? Is it actually worse at all? Because they actually don't really care about who wins the war. I mean, Apple could be Nokia, and Samsung wouldn't care. I mean, they would just sell to the Chinese instead. So we'll see about that. So I think Samsung is really good, but I wonder, can it get a bit better at all? And actually, I think it potentially could. And I just wanted to show you this very quickly. This is Samsung CNT. This is the family vehicle to control Samsung. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I'll just show you the core business in which they build the plants for Samsung Electronics, the tech plants, but also they build high-rise buildings like the Burj Khalifa. That makes money, 1.1 billion EBIT according to the company. We say 1 billion, so you can value that. And then they have these stakes there, Samsung Electronics stake. That alone is worth more than the market cap of CNT. And then they have another big stake in Samsung Life, which also helps them control Samsung Electronics. And then they have something called Samsung Biologics, which is worth 23 billion in the market. And that's a CMO biologics company. They manufacture biologics. There's only pretty much 3 companies globally: Lonza, Boehringer Ingelheim, and Samsung Biologics. That has to be worth something. But if we say it's worth half that, well, summing all that gives you 127% upside, which is a bit better than Samsung Electronics. But anyway, it's a bit more complicated, but I think it's quite interesting also to flag. You can play Samsung Electronics either way. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. And we kind of agree with you when you look at the industry of memory, how the consolidation has translated into better behavior, even though it's cyclical, better behavior in the market. And certainly the leadership of Samsung, way ahead of Micron, technology-wise, I think it's very compelling. One thing we're struggling, though, I wonder how you guys think about this, is because we're very close to Silicon Valley, maybe we get to, I don't know if we're more biased or we get to see other things. But lately, we've been thinking about it's kind of comparing the demand that you see in the data centers from companies that don't make any money, what they call the unicorns. And so I've been thinking about this. Maybe this is kind of what happened in the 90s with fiber, where there was an overbuilt of fiber because it was relying on potential demand that eventually didn't come at the moment, came like a decade later. So what I'm saying is, and I don't know the answer, I'm just kind of struggling about this, is it possible that some of this big money that has been going to data centers by AWS, Microsoft, and so on. There's relying on demand from companies that because they don't make any money, they're going to disappear. And maybe the oversupply is bigger than what we think. And I don't know, I'm just wondering how you guys think about this.
Yeah, good question. I have to say I don't really have an answer to that either. I guess the way I'm thinking about it is that we're at the very beginning of that. So perhaps we will get to such oversupply situation at some point, but perhaps it's too early to get to that. Also, I would say that Samsung, Hynix, and Micron seem to be behaving in a very flexible way. So the first sign of weakness in demand, which happened, and we can talk about that if you will for a little bit, but it was last year. There was a lot of ordering, just in case these trade wars had any kind of impact on supply. So people just, over-ordered on the mobile side and on the server side. And now we basically digesting that. So we have a lot of inventory at the moment. But, they've reacted pretty quick. So they suddenly said, okay, we're not doing extra Capex, and we're actually delaying the speed of ramp up to add supply, and, we'll see how it goes. But they're still making, good margin, 36% plus. Some of them make even more than that. So I guess of course they've learned from the past, right? This has been a terrible industry for so long, so they know the cycles come and go, and but the fact that supply, the addition of supply is getting so much more expensive and difficult makes them really think twice about committing to extra X number of $1 billion. So they're sort of playing around the edges and trying to pull back to protect the profitability as an industry. So we could get there, definitely, but I think the industry themselves behave in a much more rational way. So perhaps they will try to mitigate. So it's still, I don't really have the answer to that, but I think we're early days and the industry is better. That's the way
Andrés, the decision or the announcement of the decision that they want to pay 50% of cash flow to shareholders is about 18 months old, I think, but they haven't done it since yet. In fact, they actually stopped buying their shares for the last year or so. What do you think about it, and what do you expect them to do to honor the commitment?
I think they've done it. I think you have to add up dividend and buyback. So both together, they have done it. Yeah.
The historical discount on CNT has been 70% for almost 5 years. Do you see any trigger that how these holding companies discount could narrow? That's my first question. And then I would like to add a few things I think you should add in your presentation. The first of all is when you compare Samsung to Apple, Samsung is spending much more in R&D than Apple. That's probably one line you should add. And the second thing also is I think the form factor you haven't mentioned. Next week, Samsung is launching the foldable phone. The OLED screens are flexible. That gives them a huge advantage versus Apple, and I think that might change also the replacement rate of traditional mobile phone, which have been quite dull during the last 5 years. Because so this could be also, I think, an interesting trigger.
Absolutely.
And finally, one last point on LG Display. They are actually doing OLED. All the TVs, OLED TVs, are currently manufactured by LG Display. So you said they were not, but
4 things. Let me remember all of them. So on the foldable, I forgot to mention that, but that's totally true. And that's how they go back to this stoking the war. They've basically come up with this foldable phone, which doubles the need of OLED, which the Chinese will have to copy, and then Apple will feel they have to do something about it. So that will be adding a lot of extra demand just coming from the smartphone on the OLED side of things. So that's how they play this game, and they've done it again. LG don't, so the OLED that LG do is different at the moment. They do a tiny bit of small screen OLED. That's RGB, red, green, blue. The TVs, the LG TVs are wallet, white OLED. They're different, a complete different technology. They're very good at that. They still don't make money on that. This is not what they're after. LG, Samsung Display is not going after that. They're going after the small screen, so that's that. So on the discount of CNT, and I forgot the other one, but I hopefully remember. Yes, you're right. Actually, the discount started to widen from about 2015 when all this Elliott issues, came to the fore, and actually stayed, pretty open, before it wasn't like that. So, we believe hopefully all these changes in Korean government and the changes at Samsung itself will help people realize and close the gap. CNT itself has been selling non-core assets. They sold last year a building. With that, they lowered their net debt big time. They were about to sell a company called Hanwha Chemical, but they didn't get the right price, so they just walked away from that. So they're actually behaving very rationally. And what was the last point you mentioned? I forgot that. Oh, the R&D, yeah. Actually, I tried to show this here, and the free cash flow number includes that. So that would be part of the Ebit, right? It's part of the OPEX. So it's kind of...
Just a quick one on the normalization of the memory business. One of your early slides, I think, had the divisional EBIT, and it looked like it's up 3- or 4-fold in terms of profitability in that division. I'm just wondering how you get to what you think is sustainable, given it seems to be earning dramatically higher than it was historically.
Well, there's no rocket science behind that, to be honest. I cannot tell you, I know you know the answer. But we basically said, this will normalize at a lower number than last year, but much better than before. And, that's sort of our 22 billion number. And if they're selling they're selling 50 billion this year, potentially growing up to, 60 or whatever over the coming years, perhaps a 30% margin, sort of. But it's a bit of a ballpark, finger in the air exercise, to be honest.
Okay, you had a slide up that had one of the broker price forecasts there. I think they're saying down 60% potentially. Are you thinking that will be offset by volume? And
this one here, yeah, indeed. I mean, 2019 is actually, looking quite grim because DRAM price is going down by more than 50%. So the early years, we will see massive EPS. That's the top dotted line. That's the EPS revisions from consensus. So that's coming down big time. But again, they were actually factoring in, flat 70% margin going forward, which doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense at all. So we never thought that would make sense. Actually, we own Samsung Electronics. Then we moved out a little bit into CNT instead because it gives you a bit less leverage to the memory cycle. Now the memory cycle is sort of, panning out. Interestingly, to see all these CPS revisions down and the share price is not going down any further. So, yeah, absolutely. But that number from consensus was factoring in like flat 70% type of margin for DRAM, which is not sensible either.